last time we talked about networking. So today we will talk about web applications in Android. Again, this will be just for one day topic, short topic, and then we will move on to memory management on Friday. Okay. Let's continue with this topic. Okay, there you go. Takes a few minutes to respond. So far, when you looked at application development in Android, we have been all doing something called applications which are native applications in Android. Meaning that this is a complete application that is developed using the Android API directly to run on Android device. Okay? And these are what we call as fully client-side applications that are installed on the device. Another way that you can go about doing applications is to develop something called web applications. Okay? If you have visited many sites, you would see that many of those sites nowadays offer something called the mobile sites. Right? If you go to CNN.com, they usually have the mobile site, BBC.com, and many other places have mobile sites. These sites are pre-configured to fit the size of these small devices that you carry in your pocket. And you can view these mobile sites or using the browser that is already part of your Android device. Right? If you, like for example, if you go to mobile.cnn.com or mobile, in fact, let's have a look at some of these sites and then see the difference between the main site and the mobile site so that we get an idea of what it looks like. The difference between the main site and the mobile site. So if we go into, let's see, CNN, and then have a look at the corresponding site, you would notice that this is what the original CNN website looks like. Right? These websites are primarily designed for viewing on devices that are large, that have large space and so on. And typically, if you try to view these websites on a small device like a smartphone, obviously your experience would be a lot less comfortable. Right? So very often, many of these sites will have a mobile version of their sites. Let me see if they have. Do you see a mobile somewhere?
Maybe just Control plus F. Yeah, find the keyword you like.
Oh yeah. But you do notice that these sites are huge. They are comfortable to view in a standard desktop browser. But if you try to open them in a mobile device, if you have anybody has a mobile device, you can open the same site on your mobile device. You would notice that it's very uncomfortable to read those. Tablets are a little bit better, but generally they are difficult to read. So many of these sites would usually have a companion, I think it should be either mobile or let us see what the corresponding checking from where the app originates and then from where the request originates, and then they will automatically redirect you to the mobile website. So obviously, they have already customized it to be able to see the app on the mobile website. Now, similarly, for example, if you go to UST's website, you would notice that this website is more designed for being viewed on a standard desktop. I think we should be able to see a but on the other hand, if you want these websites to be more easily viewable on a small device, then it is better to redesign the website to fit the view of a small device. Let me see where it is. I think if you go to So notice that the mobile website is more designed to fit the size of the small device's view, and so you would be able to go and view these websites on the mobile device and read it more comfortably. But obviously, this requires the users to design a separate website that is more suited for mobile devices. Fortunately, with the availability of HTML5 and JavaScript, this is not very difficult to achieve in practice. So that is one way you can easily meet the needs of mobile applications. So simply redesign your website such that it can be easily viewed using a browser. Very often, many of the mobile apps that you use often are reflecting the contents that are already available on the standard website of the company, but more fitted to the smaller screen. So, but this also means that you need to use the browser that is part of your device in order to go and access these websites. This is not a way that you use mobile devices, right? In a mobile device, obviously, if you need to access something, you want to just simply invoke a mobile app and then be able to make use of the information from a mobile app. So, can we design a mobile app that can take advantage of web technologies to be able to deliver a user experience that is more closer to what a native app on the device looks like, but at the same time, you don't need to be able to redesign the website or the information for different platforms. So in case of Android, for example, this is very easily accomplished because Android provides you with support for something called viewport properties, so that you can properly size your web application depending on the screen size of the device. So the display of the information will automatically adapt to the screen size of the device. In addition, Android provides support for CSS and JavaScript. How many of you know CSS and JavaScript? How many of you have written websites using CSS and JavaScript? One. That's it? You? Anybody else? None of you have done CSS and JavaScript? This is a very good skill to pick up. It's not very difficult. Even I can do it. So I'm sure you can easily do it. CSS and JavaScript are not that difficult to pick up. Okay? Now, again, these features, specific features are available here that allow you to to be able to adapt the display of information on the screen to the screen size and screen resolution very easily. So you can query and get a lot of information from the device. So how do you implement web applications? Web applications are usually implemented partly on the client side and partly using a web. How do you do that in practice? For this, we already saw that in Android you have this view called as WebView. We have already seen the use of WebView in the apps that we have developed earlier. Okay? So in this case, you simply embed a web view in your application and then load the information into the web view. The information that is loaded in the web view can be standard HTML and JavaScript and then CSS and so on. So that's the way you can very easily leverage the availability of web view within your application to be able to fetch information from a website, or to even format information that you have and then display it in a web view. Now, obviously, if you have a website somewhere, then don't simply design. I mean, you could, in principle, design an Android app simply by embedding one web view in your app, and then the URL of the web view will directly point to your standard website, and you're done. So it looks like an app on your mobile device. It looks like an Android app on your mobile device. The moment you invoke it, all it will do is simply open a web view that occupies the entire screen and then loads the web page from your standard website. But that is not a way of delivering nice user experience to the user. Instead, if you're going to adopt that approach, the web pages that you're going to use within your application should be specifically designed to fit the screen size of your application. Okay? That's the important thing to realize. So you have web content. The web content could be in the form of files that are already on the device, or the web content could be in the form of files that reside on a web server. Okay? Now, obviously, if any of you have constructed and managed anybody here manages websites? Constructed and manage your own websites? Nobody sets up their own websites? You do, obviously, right? So you make use of CSS templates from somebody, you borrow HTML templates from somebody, and then simply customize it to your application and so on. So the web content, if you go to the ultimate extent, you can simply put all your content into a database, and then from the database you can retrieve the content and construct the web page on the fly and then deliver it to the user. If you want very dynamic websites and so on. So that's how they are built, right? You can make use of JavaScript plus CSS plus the HTML technologies in order to deliver such content. Okay, so the content that is part of your website would be either on a website or already embedded in your application. Now, this content can be displayed in one of two ways. You can use the embedded Android browser that is part of your device to display the same content, or you can simply define an Android app with a web view embedded in there and then simply deliver the same content to that web view. Now, if you do this approach, obviously you're making use of the default browser that is part of your Android device. When you use the default browser that is part of your Android device, obviously the default browser comes with its own, two toolbars on top and things like that, and they will occupy some amount of space on the screen. If you make use of a web view, you can simply get rid of those and then occupy the complete screen. Screen real estate is very, very crucial, very important to save when you're displaying content. So you try to get rid of all unnecessary items from the screen to maximize the usage of the screen for your specific app. Okay, so now this is two ways that you can deliver web content to your app, directly into your app. Now, in addition, Android provides you with a method such that if you write JavaScript to drive your HTML or drive your web page, from the JavaScript that you write, from the JavaScript, you can actually access many of the native features of the mobile device and get information from the mobile device, including things like being able to get information from the accelerometer and other sensors on the device, including getting access to the camera on the device, and so on. Many such features can easily be exploited in JavaScript on your device. I will show you a little bit of code to illustrate how you can actually access the native features that are part of your application. Now, of course, any web application is built around the use of WebView. And obviously, as you have seen in the previous examples in the labs, we have already seen how we make use of WebView to simply load websites from a distant location into the application, right? But obviously, the user experience is not very convenient when you simply load. Right? When you have seen those in the apps that I've given you in the lab, where you loaded the standard course website into the web view on the application. Okay, so starting point for building web applications is the WebView class. The WebView class is obviously an extension of the view class that you have already seen. So this is a widget that can be incorporated into the layout of the screen. Now the WebView itself comes with very little of the features that you will see in a standard browser, including things like zooming, navigation controls, or address bar. The WebView is nothing but a window within which you can display web content. That's about it. It doesn't provide you any additional features. So you can embed a web view inside an activity in order to display any web content. The web content could be either already put into the resources files of your device, or the web content could be coming from a server. If it is coming from a server, obviously you access the information over the network and then display it. Okay? So a web view, if you require to display data from a remote site, you obviously need internet connection in order to retrieve the data. Okay? Now, one easy way, as you saw, was that you could design your website to provide a mobile version of your website, and then simply use WebView to simply load that mobile version of the website into your application. So design an activity with a WebView occupying the entire layout of the screen, and then simply load URL from the website and then display it on the screen. Done. Okay, that's the starting point for designing a web application. So we have already seen this in our exercises in the lab. But when you make use of WebView, obviously, this is what you will include, or some variant of this is what you will include in the layout files. And once you put it there, then you have access to it and you can modify it as you feel appropriate. If you use exactly this one, the web view is basically covering the entire screen. There is nothing else in the layout. The web view is simply covering the entire screen. You can have a web view together with other items on the screen if you wish to design it better. Suppose you want to load a web page from a server, from a web server. Within your activities on create lifecycle method, the activity needs to host this web view, the layout, right? So obviously it has to be hosted inside an activity, as you saw in the examples earlier. You need to host this, and then you simply get a URL, and then you get a handle to the web view that is included in the layout, and then simply say my web view load URL, and then supply the URL, and then that's it. That content will be loaded into the web view. Okay? Fairly straightforward to do. And if you are accessing a site on the internet, you need to turn on the permissions for accessing the internet in the manifest file. We have already seen that. So these are standard ways to do. Of course, we are done. But we obviously want more features to be available within our application. From the server side, you want to be able to make use of JavaScript. If you're already very familiar with JavaScript and HTML5 and other CSS and other web-related technologies, and you don't know much of Android, and you really don't want to spend time too much learning the Android's native APIs, then you could simply design all the user experience using the technology JavaScript plus HTML plus CSS as a mobile enabled application, enabled website. And then, but if you're going to make use of JavaScript, you want the JavaScript capability to be enabled on the WebView. So how do you enable JavaScript on the WebView? So you get the WebView reference, and then after you get the WebView reference, this is the one that you make use of. Web settings is the one that you make use of in order to control the features of the WebView. So you can say web settings, and then you call this. This will basically return a pointer to the object that specifies the settings for the WebView that you're using within your application. And then once you get web settings, if you want JavaScript to be enabled, you simply call this method of web settings object, and then that will enable JavaScript. So in case you're using JavaScript on your mobile site, then it'll work pretty fine in the WebView. If you don't do it, then your web information may not be displayed appropriately. Now this, of course, is very straightforward. But by enabling JavaScript, you get even more powerful features that are part of your web application. Because by enabling JavaScript, you can bind JavaScript to Android's native code. You can use certain features from the Android's native API to invoke certain aspects and then make use of it directly from JavaScript. So binding JavaScript to Android code. So if you develop a piece of Android code and then you want to be able to call that piece of code from JavaScript, how do you do it? This is provided by binding using something called add JavaScript interface, and then passing it a class instance to bind the JavaScript and an interface name, so that your JavaScript can call and access the class if you define a class within your Android framework. This way, JavaScript code can call Android code. For example, if you want to display a dialog box on the screen, obviously if you're using an Android application, you want the user to respond to something, you would pop up a dialog box on the screen. Say, for example, if you want to say yes or no, or go ahead and cancel and things like that. You have seen dialog boxes popping up on the screen. Okay? If you do that, even your web application, to the user, from the user's experience perspective, it looks as if it's a native application. So this is what is enabled by binding JavaScript to Android code. How is it done in practice? You could easily do that, for example. Say, for example, you want to make use of the toast that is part of Android. You all know how toast is used in Android, right? If you want to pop up a temporary message on the screen, you make use of toast. Can you do the same toast from JavaScript? And for that, what you do is you declare a public class called JavaScript interface. Okay? And then in here, for example, you can declare things like show toast, and then in here you can, and when this function is called, you can supply the string, and then that will be displayed by calling toast, which is Android's native code, right? So you could declare a class like this there, JavaScript interface. Once you have done that, then what you can do is you can bind the JavaScript interface to the web by calling this particular set. So you get a reference to the WebView, and then you say add JavaScript interface, new JavaScript interface, this, Android. Then all those functions that you put inside the public class JavaScript interface is now accessible from JavaScript. So from within JavaScript, if you want to invoke any of those functions, so if you write a JavaScript function, for example, inside there you could do something like this. Yeah.
So we can't binding the class in web browser. We only can bind it in web view.
In the WebView, yeah, in the WebView. WebView is the one that provides you with access to display web content, right? So you can add this JavaScript interface. Now, as you saw from the previous class, you can declare this class, and then you can provide many methods in there which allow you to access Android's native API calls, and then you simply declare that as a JavaScript interface to attach it to the WebView, and then if you write JavaScript that is part of what is going to be displayed in the WebView, you can simply make use. Say, for example, this is part of, in one of the HTML pages, you can include that and then put this script in the HTML, and notice that this is directly invoking the custom extension. Similarly, you can pop up dialog boxes and all the other things. Just put them into the JavaScript interface class there, bind it, and then you will be able to invoke it from JavaScript by using such methods. Yeah?
If we build this web page, the native Android browser.
Or you mean the standard Android browser? It won't work. It won't work. Because this is making use of the native API. The standard browser doesn't provide these features. So you can't do that in the standard browser. This would be where you will embed it into your application. In an activity, inside an activity, you're opening this web view, and then you bind this JavaScript interface class to that web view. And then whatever you load in that web view, what you load into the web view would be HTML plus JavaScript. That JavaScript that you load into the web view can then call the native functions that are provided through this JavaScript interface. That's how you're able to invoke. Now, why is this useful? What happens is much of the functionality that you want to deliver within your application, you can simply implement using HTML plus CSS with JavaScript, which you might already be very familiar with. And then, but you can still invoke certain native functionality. Like, for example, when the user sees dialog boxes popping up on the screen, they expect it to see the dialog boxes that are more like Android's native dialog boxes. Or if you want, for example, to have a pop-up box coming in to allow the user to input some information, all these things can be delivered to look more like a native application's features. So to the end user is never aware of the fact that they are using a web application rather than a native application. That's the thing. You are basically surrounding the web application with native code and then making it appear as if it's a native application. In fact, later on, I will actually show you a version of the class info application that you have been seeing in the lab. I implemented the same with a version using HTML plus JavaScript. And I will see that the code is very, very simple, very straightforward. But I had to do much of the work in HTML and JavaScript, not in Android's native API. And the user interface can easily be customized to look exactly like the native application interface. Now, one advantage is that the HTML plus JavaScript plus everything that you develop can be reused in another application for a different platform. In fact, I will show you an example of a designing platform called PhoneGap, where I will show you how you can simply target multiple platforms using web applications. Now, if you were to include, if the user clicks URLs in the web view, you have two choices: either to pop up a separate browser or to directly load the URL directly into the web view. So for this, you can set for WebView, you can set the WebView client. Okay, so if you do this within your application, what you are specifying to the WebView is saying that if the user clicks on a URL, then the resulting new web page is also loaded in the same web view. If you go back to the code from the lab, you will notice that I have made use of this. That is why you can browse from one to the other and still see the whole thing on a single page. If you go back to the let me see, course info in the source, for example, you will notice that I am using this thing called web window, this class called webwindow.java. This is where I am declaring, see on onCreate, I open r.layout.webwindow. This web window is nothing but if I show you the layout file, if I show you the layout file, you will notice that this layout file contains a web view embedded in there. But I have also used text views surrounding the web view in order to create a nice user interface. People complain about the circling thing in Windows 7. You see it here too. Okay, so this is web window. Now, what does this web window contain? This web window contains nothing but just one single web view. So whatever I load is directly visible in the web view. Now, in order to make this work correctly, so I get a handle to the web view that is part of the web window, and then I set up things like support zoom. So if I do this, that will allow me to provide zoom controls on the screen so that I can zoom in and out of the web view. JavaScript enabled, built-in zoom controls, and then set default zoom. So for example, if you have a mobile device, you can set the default zoom to show a certain part of the device. So by setting this to zoom density far, I basically compress the whole web page to fit within the window. So that's why you notice that when you invoke this application, let's see the running of this application. You would notice certain features. Okay, I will bring this in here. So notice that when I do that, this is nothing but a web window, and then this whole page is compressed down to fit into the web window. Okay. Now this is what is accomplished by setting zoom. What is that code there? That is accomplished by setting this set default zoom density far, meaning that I will try to view the web page. Now, if I did not have zoom controls, I won't be able to see this web page any further. But on this web page, for example, on this particular web page, I can go in and I should be able to click on any one of them And then when I click on another link and go to another web page, that is loaded in the same web window, rather than loading in a separate browser. If I did not enable that, then if I clicked on any of the links, it would have caused an invocation of a browser, which is part of the Android device, and it will be displayed there. But instead, I want, even if I click, that same thing to be displayed on the same browser. Furthermore, I also want to be able to use the back button as the back button as you would use in a standard browser. You always have a back button in a browser, but as you see on the screen, you don't see any browser button there. Okay, so how do we accomplish that? This is accomplished by doing something called Web Chrome Client, which allows me to set this up in such a way that all this information will be displayed as if it's an embedded browser in there. So going back to the handling of the page navigation and so on. So this is what I was explaining to you. So if you want to have full control, you can create your own WebView client, and this should override URL loading, and you declare this thing. And this way, what happens is you have complete control. So even if the user clicks on links, those links will also be loaded into the same web. So these features are very, very useful for page navigation. Now, navigating backwards and forwards is enabled by using go back and go forward functions of your web view. Okay? Now, to do this, for example, as you saw, I'm making use of the back key. And when I click the back key, I am simply navigating backwards. Now, how is that implemented? I implement this particular key event handler. You all know how to put key event handlers, right? So here I say on key down. If the key code is back and the view can go back, then I simply ask it to go back. So this is how I'm basically overriding the standard back functionality of my back key to make use of it as my back function of the web browser. If I did not include this, if I click the back key, it would have simply gone from the web view to the previous view, which is the list view. That's what it would have done if you remove this code from the web window activity that I have included in the code. Okay? So this is how I can gain full control over providing a nice user interface within the web view. So part of the application is implemented as web application within the example that I have given earlier. Again, go back to the course info application in the lab exercises and see how the web window part of it works. And that should provide you with very good introduction on how web views can be used for developing applications. Okay? Any questions? Everything okay so far? Now, obviously, we don't have one single mobile platform that is popular. You have multiple mobile platforms. So typically, the application developers are faced with the problem of having to develop multiple applications for the different platforms. You have to develop a separate iOS application, and the iOS application code cannot be reused if you want to do an Android application. So if you have to take a particular mobile application, you have to do two implementations to target the two major platforms, iOS and Android. Some people worked around this problem by simply making use of the mobile web and telling users, saying, look, I don't have time to implement a native mobile app for you, but here, go to my mobile website, and then the mobile website is optimized to be viewed on the mobile device, and there you go, done. If you were to be given the responsibility, say you go to work tomorrow and then you are given the responsibility of implementing a mobile website, how would you implement a mobile website? For us, fortunately, especially implementing a mobile website that is friendly to the mobile devices. If you don't do anything else other than implementing a simple mobile website, all that you need to do is to use HTML plus JavaScript plus CSS. And then you can easily implement a nice mobile website. So, for that, you can make use of HTML5 plus CSS. All of you know at least something about CSS, right? In addition, if you were to make use of certain prepackaged libraries like jQuery, how many of you know about jQuery? 1, 2. If you have done any websites, you know that jQuery is a very powerful JavaScript library that you can very easily make use of for implementing complex websites, right? jQuery is very well optimized for that purpose. Now, when it comes to mobile, jQuery is too big, so they implemented a mobile version of it called jQuery Mobile. If you need to know more information, just go to that website, and then you'll be able to see more information about jQuery Mobile. In addition to these, you also have something called Sencha or Senka. I don't know how they pronounce it. Since I don't know how they pronounce it, I'll simply say Sencha. Whatever. Sencha. This is touch-enabled, touch-friendly implementations. So, combining these three, you can easily design a nice mobile website that plays very friendly with your touch-capable devices. Things like, for example, if you ever try to view a standard website on your mobile browser and you try to click on a link, how many times have you managed to click on the wrong links because your thumb is too thick? Has that happened to you? Right? Using these, you can design it in such a way that your touch is more properly perceived and implemented. So this, summed up together, can be very easily used to implement a nice mobile website. Why stop at that point? Why not try and leverage that mobile website and then embed it into WebView that I just talked about in Android, and then deliver an application that looks and behaves just like a native application, but is completely web application based. In particular, if you want to target 2 or more platforms, then a very nice, one of the very popular ways of targeting multiple platforms using back-end web and front-end developed for specific platforms is this library called as PhoneGap. I don't know whether you should call it library or a framework. Probably framework is a better word for it. It's PhoneGap. Has anybody heard of PhoneGap before? If you have not, okay, you two have heard. Have you done any PhoneGap apps? You tried to.
Work on it.
Okay. I'll show you a little example that I did with PhoneGap. Again, it is not very difficult to do. It's fairly straightforward. If you don't like that, there is another one called Accelerator Titanium, which is also yet another way of targeting multi-mobile platforms, leveraging on web content that you already developed, mobile web content that you already developed. So yesterday, I have been playing around with PhoneGap for a while. One of my FIPs made use of PhoneGap for developing an application. So I thought, how do I show you how to make use of PhoneGap? So I've been playing around with it for a while, and then I said, okay, let me implement the same course info app that you've seen earlier, but now making use of PhoneGap plus HTML plus HTML5 plus JavaScript plus CSS and so on. So that was my motivation in doing this next application, which I will show you. You can decide and tell me whether you like this version better than the native version that I've developed. I'll even show you some of the source code that I make use of and how I actually implement it with PhoneGap. This is the PhoneGap version of the application, and you would notice that this app looks like this. It should come up on the screen in a minute. Should be up on the screen in a minute. Come. What happened? Okay, one more time. I have installed this app on this particular thing, and then I invoked it, so I will just simply go and directly invoke where. See, right when I want to demo to you, it won't work. Okay, I think what I will do is I will quit and restart the emulator. It was up on the screen just a short while ago. So anyway, how did I implement this particular version? If I show you the code first before the result, you would notice that this particular application contains only one file in the source. This is the file. One file. Okay. All that this file does is, this is a public class which extends DroidGap. DroidGap is a class which is part of the PhoneGap framework. And then in here, the DroidGap is nothing but an extension of the standard activity class that you already see. So this is a extension of it. That's why you have the onCreate lifecycle method there. In here, all that you are doing is you're saying super load URL, and then you're loading a web page which is resident on the device itself. So yeah, I'm simply loading this web page on the device. And all the functionality and features that you will see is all implemented in the web page. This is the only source file which is Android specific in this particular example. Now, in addition to that, let me see if my okay. This is what the screen looks like. doesn't this look pretty similar? Well, I can easily make it look exactly the same as the native app that I have given you. It's just that I didn't have enough time to go and edit the CSS file in order to put all the colors and everything on the screen. But it can be very easily done. Very straightforward to do. If you click on any one of these, say for example, if I click on that, it will simply take me to the course website. Exactly the same functionality as what you have seen in the previous app. But this is implemented as a web application, and I'm making use of phone gap in order to drive the screen, and that's about it. And all the functionality is all implemented using JavaScript plus HTML5 plus CSS. Okay? Now, obviously, you must be wondering, how did I manage to get this nice interface in place? It takes no more than 10 minutes to get this done. Once you know how to do it, obviously. You need to learn how to do it. This was all done using jQuery mobile plus HTML5, CSS, and so on. How is it done? This is where all the magic is. This is in the www. This is the corresponding HTML page that you saw as the user interface. So what have I done in the HTML page? I loaded a whole bunch of JavaScripts and then some CSS files. Okay, and then in the body, I declare this UL. You all know what UL is, right? HTML. Unordered list. This unordered list is nothing but all the web pages that you have. And I made use of CSS to format this unordered list to look like, well, I didn't even have to do that. Fortunately, jQuery Mobile provides me with all these features. So I simply drag in a CSS file which provides me with a nice way of laying out the screen appropriately. And all I needed to do was invoke it and then write HTML code. That's it. This is one piece of HTML code that I wrote in order to generate an application that looks exactly like a native application. Okay? So as you see, in PhoneGap plus, or actually with jQuery Mobile, you have all these things defined called list view, something called data roles that you will see. You can actually have multiple pages embedded in a single HTML file, and then you can allow with JavaScript scripts, you can easily go between one to the other, and it will automatically insert back buttons and things like that for you. So the user interface will look exactly like what it will look on a standard if you were to develop the same application using one of the standard platforms. But obviously this is multi-platform enabled. And so this one, and this is the CSS files that I make use of, and I got all of these from jQuery Mobile, and then simply made use of them, and then they will automatically format the screen to look like it. If I simply take this and then open the same thing with a web browser, on a standard web browser, this is what it will look like. It's nothing but a web page, so it will look exactly like a web browser. If you want it to be even more if you want to know how it works, let me see. What I will do is I will open it. Okay. Let me go to the directory that contains this web page. I'm simply browsing to the directory that contains this web page, and then I will invoke that I will open that file in the standard web browser, and you will notice if you load it in a standard web browser, the user interface looks very much like it, but this is more optimized to fit the small screens. Obviously on a large thing it doesn't look, it looks ugly, but on a small screen like a mobile application, and it works even on a regular browser. So much of the functionality is now implemented using HTML with JavaScript. Yeah? Okay, so this is yet another feature that I wanted to illustrate to you. Phone gap. Okay, now to make use of phone gap, if you want to know how to make use of phone gap, well, for phone gap it's very straightforward. If you go to their website, you can download the information from there, and then they will give you prepackaged with an example. Just pull the example in, and then you can make use of it within your code. In fact, within their, they even provide an example where they allow you to access So, for example, this phone with phone gap, you can easily access things like the device's internal things, like you can. Let's see. Doesn't seem to be responding today. Okay, there you go. So, for example, you can click on that. Some of these things are not working because, so for example, if you click on, let's see. It was working yesterday, today it doesn't want to work. If I click get a picture, it will simply open up the camera and then show the picture on the screen. For some reason it doesn't want to work today. But how is all this implemented? Again, even in the phone gap example, when you go in, you will notice that the source code is just one single file. This is exactly the same as before, previous source code, no change. All the functionality is all implemented using the web pages. So if you go into assets, www, you will see that all this functionality is implemented inside this particular web page. You have linked to all these JavaScript files And then you will notice that each one of them has been implemented using a DL. You know what a DL is, right? Display list. This is what creates the user interface that you just saw on the screen. Everything controlled by CSS, which is given in this CSS file. So you can go in and make changes here appropriately, so that you can create a nice user interface. And then the JavaScript, two JavaScript files, these two JavaScript files, and then the index file. So all the functionality is just implemented by these. Fairly straightforward. Okay. One of our students did this particular example. Let me show you that also using PhoneGap. They implemented this example where they were making use of it to access the SIS system in order to obtain your timetables and then display it on the screen. Let me see if I can make it work. We managed to only get the your timetable information out of the system, and then you can easily implement. This is just the timetable information being displayed, and you can have a day view of a particular day. Obviously, web applications are a little bit slower than standard applications on the emulator, but on a real device, you don't find that much of difference in the functionality. You can have a week view. This is like a calendar. All this information is actually derived from SIS systems that you use. We go into SIS from the back and grab your timetable information from there, and then use it to construct all this information for you. Not only that, they implemented things like, for example, if you want to set up meetings with friends, so you can do something like find free time slots, and then you can say find free time slots between two people, and then it will find you the time slots when both of you are free. Again, all the coding is done in HTML, JavaScript, CSS. The actual Android part of the code is single file, one single file. Again, I'll show you the corresponding code. So you see, we can display information like this on the screen. This is all formatted using JavaScript. Okay? Now, for this particular function, if you look at the source code, the source code file should contain just one single piece. This is exactly the same thing as the other applications. So all the magic is done using JavaScript and HTML5. Okay? All right. That wraps up the section on web applications. Any questions? Any questions before I finish up this section? Okay? Yeah. We are a little bit early today, but that's all right. I will stick around to answer any questions if you have. If not, we are done for today. Okay, next topic would be about memory management, which is yet another interesting topic to be covered. We'll do that